Hi everyone, and welcome to Hontora. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This is the place where we explore the darkest, most deeply unsettling true horror stories the internet has to offer. And if you've been here before, welcome back. Genuinely glad you're here. I'll be straight with you. This one took me longer to put together than usual. Not because of the research, not because of the editing, just because of what the stories actually are. There are videos on this channel I'd rewatch without blinking. These two I'm not sure I could. Make of that what you will. And before we go any further, thank you, I mean that, simply and without much decoration. The people who show up every week, who sit in the dark and actually let these stories in. I notice the channel feels like something real because of you. And I don't take that lightly. As always, links are sitting right at the top of the description. Nothing buried, nothing hard to find. 2 stories tonight. The first one unsettled me in a way I could at least name. The second one, I'm still not sure I have the words for it. I've thought about it almost every day since I found it. Some stories don't ask for your attention, they just take it and don't give it back. When it's over, come find me in the comments. Tell me what you felt. I read all of them. Now, lights down, get comfortable, and let's get into it. Viewer discretion is advised. My wife called me a professional skeptic, not as a compliment. She meant it the way you'd call someone a professional pessimist, like it was a flaw dressed up in a suit. I worked in structural engineering for 11 years. I was trained to look at something and find the weakness in it. The place where the math didn't hold. So when I tell you what happened at that farmhouse, I need you to understand that I spent most of that summer trying very hard to explain it away. I was good at that, better than most, and it still wasn't enough. We rented the property through a private listing site. Late spring, my wife Clara had just finished a brutal 2-year stretch as an ER charge nurse, and I'd wrapped a major contract. We had money saved, we had no children, we had, as Clara put it, absolutely no excuse not to go somewhere quiet and remember what we actually liked about each other. She found the farmhouse in a rural county about 4 hours inland. Old 2-story colonial wraparound porch, 6 acres of field and tree line. The listing said it had been recently updated. The owner, a man named Gerald Phelps, who communicated only by email, described it as fully furnished and move-in ready. He mentioned the property had been managed for many years by a live-in caretaker who had recently retired, and that some personal items might still be in the process of being removed. He apologized for any inconvenience. We didn't think twice about it. We arrived on a Friday evening in late June. The house was exactly what the photos showed. A little worn at the edges, the kind of tired that comes from decades of weather rather than neglect. The porch boards were solid. The roof looked recently patched. Inside it smelled like lemon oil and something older underneath it, the way very old wood smells when it's been sealed over but not quite replaced. Clara loved it immediately. I checked the foundation lines from the outside, assessed the chimney, looked at the electrical panel in the mudroom. Habit. Everything seemed fine. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. Not the whole house, just parts of it. There were cold spots that didn't make architectural sense. A section of the upstairs hallway near the linen closet that dropped maybe 5 or 6 degrees for about 4 feet, then normalized. A corner of the master bedroom near the baseboard where the air felt thick and stale, like a pocket of atmosphere that hadn't circulated in a long time. I attributed it to old construction, gaps in insulation, irregular airflow through outdated HVAC ductwork. The house was over 100 years old. I wrote it in my head as a quirk of the building and moved on. The journal was in the 3rd drawer of a writing desk in the study, a squat, low-ceilinged room off the main hallway that we mostly used to store our bags. Clara found it on our 4th day. It was a standard composition book, black and white cover, the cardboard warped from moisture. The cover had no name, just the word ledger written in ballpoint across the front. She brought it to the kitchen table and we read it together over coffee. the way you'd look through someone's old photos at a yard sale. Curious, vaguely entertained. The early entries were mundane. Property maintenance logs, dates, tasks, materials used. He'd repaired the south fence in March, treated the porch boards in April, replaced a section of drywall in the upstairs hallway. It read like a contractor's invoice, almost relaxing in its tedium. But then the entries changed. Not dramatically, just gradually, the way light changes when a cloud is coming and you don't notice until you're already cold. He started writing about the guests, not in a hostile way, just observations. A couple from the city who left food in the sink, a family with 2 children who stayed 3 weeks and played music too loud. He described them in short, clinical sentences, noting their routines, when they woke, when they ate, when they went to bed. He noted which rooms they used and which they didn't. He wrote that guests rarely used the study. He wrote it twice, in 2 separate entries. And then he wrote, and I read this line 3 times before saying anything to Clara. He wrote, "The study wall stays warm in winter. I am grateful for that." I closed the journal. Clara was watching me. I told her it was probably just an old man who didn't have much going on, who spent too much time alone on a property he'd worked his whole life. She said quietly that the owner's email had said the caretaker recently retired. That recently was a relative term. I said we shouldn't jump to conclusions. She didn't say anything back. She just looked at the journal and then looked at the wall beside the study door. That night I measured the study wall. I did it after Clara went to bed with a tape measure I found in the mudroom. The interior wall was 14 inches thick. I stood there in the dark with the tape measure in my hand and 14 inches in my head. 14 inches in a wood frame colonial built in the 1920s is not a structural wall measurement. It is a gap. It is a cavity. It is a space that, in a house this old, would be accessible from the basement or from behind the chimney chase, both of which were rooms I had been in, but not thoroughly, not with this in mind. I went to the basement. I want to be careful here because I don't want to overstate what I found. There was no dramatic revelation, no sudden confrontation. What I found was a section of the basement wall, behind the old oil furnace, which had been replaced by gas but never removed, where the drywall didn't match. It was newer. The seams were slightly uneven. There was a single small hook screwed into the concrete block at floor level, the kind you'd use to hold a door closed from the inside. The hook was worn smooth. It had been used many times over many years. Below it on the floor was a compression mark in the old linoleum, a small oval shape, the size of a heel. I stood very still. The furnace ticked. I listened to the house. I heard something above me shift. Not a creak. Houses creak. This was different. This was weight redistributing. This was a person adjusting their position in a small space because they had been in that space a long time and their body needed to move. I walked upstairs. I walked to the bedroom. I woke Clara up and I told her to put her shoes on and bring her phone and not to ask me anything until we were outside. She looked at my face and she did not ask anything. We walked out the front door and got in the car, and I drove us to a gas station 20 minutes away, and I called the county sheriff from the parking lot at 2 a.m. They responded in force. I'll say that. 2 deputies and a county detective arrived within the hour. They were methodical. They found what I'd found in the basement, and they found more. A narrow passage running along the interior of the study wall, roughly 20 inches wide, a sleeping mat, a battery lantern, a plastic storage bin containing personal items, clothing, a toothbrush, a pair of reading glasses in a soft case, and a second journal, this one filled completely from cover to cover. The detective would not let me see it. He referred to it only as ongoing evidence. The caretaker, Dietrich, his name came out in the following days, an older man who had lived and worked on that property for nearly 3 decades, was not found in the house. He had left or hidden, or simply known the moment I went to the basement that the equation had changed. They searched the property. They searched the tree line. They found boot prints in the east field moving toward the county road. They did not find him, not that week, not for several weeks after. Clara and I were interviewed twice. We never returned to the house. Gerald Phelps, the owner, maintained that he had been assured by multiple parties that the property had been vacated. His communications afterward were handled by an attorney. The second journal was never described to us in detail, only that its contents were, in the detective's words, extensive and concerning. I think about those temperature anomalies sometimes, the cold spots that didn't make sense, the stale air near the baseboard. I think about how I stood in that hallway and ran through 14 logical explanations and settled on old insulation, and how he was maybe 12 inches away from my shoulder on the other side of that wall, and neither of us made a sound. The part that stays with me isn't the fear. The fear was acute, and it passed. It's the word he used in that first journal, the one we found in the study drawer, when he described the wall that stayed warm in winter. I'm not someone who panics. That's the first thing you need to understand about me. I spent 6 years working search and rescue in the Pacific Northwest before a knee injury pulled me off active rotation. And in those 6 years, I saw what real panic looks like, the kind that gets people killed. So I learned early to slow my breathing, assess the situation, and make decisions. That's who I am. That's how I'm wired. Which is exactly why what happened on that trail took so long to register as something I should be afraid of. It was early October, a solo backpacking trip through a stretch of national forest I'd been wanting to hit for 2 seasons. One of those mid-range wilderness areas, not famous enough to be crowded, but big enough that you could genuinely disappear in it if you weren't paying attention. 3 days out, 2 nights. I'd done the research, downloaded the offline maps, filed a trip plan with a contact back home, packed sensibly. This was not my first time in the woods alone. This was not even close to my 100th. I got turned around on day 2. I'm not embarrassed to say that. Trail markers in that section were badly maintained. 2 of them had rotted off their posts entirely, and a third had been placed facing the wrong direction, probably by someone who didn't know what they were doing. I spent about 40 minutes circling the same drainage before I admitted I wasn't sure which way I'd come from. My GPS was showing me a position that didn't match the terrain I was standing in, which happens more than people think in heavy canopy. I wasn't in danger. I was mildly, temporarily lost. There's a significant difference. That's when I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the tree line, maybe 80 meters ahead, watching me. Tall guy, lean, somewhere between 45 and 60. Hard to say at that distance. He was wearing the standard issue olive drab of a Forest Service ranger, jacket, pants, the flat-brimmed hat. He raised a hand when he saw me looking. My first thought was actually relief. If there was a ranger working this section, it meant I wasn't as deep into the backcountry as I'd thought. I walked toward him. "Looks like you've been going in circles," he said. His voice was pleasant, even. He had a calm way of standing, each weight evenly distributed, hands loose at his sides, the kind of stillness you develop after years outdoors. "Trail markers are a mess back there," I told him. "Yeah, that section's been on the maintenance list for a while." He nodded toward the slope to the northeast. "Trailhead you came in from is about 4 miles that direction if you stay on the ridge line. I'm heading back toward the northern access road. You're welcome to walk with me." I thanked him and fell into step beside him. We talked the way people talk on trails, easy, unhurried. He asked how long I'd been out, whether I'd seen much wildlife, what the creek crossing was like south of where I'd camped. I asked him how long he'd been posted to this district. He said a few years. I asked if they'd had any incidents recently. It's a habit from my SAR days, just an information reflex. He said it had been quiet season. It was maybe 20 minutes in that I noticed the first thing. I glanced at his jacket, looking for the name badge that rangers wear on the chest. The patch was there, the right colors, the right shape, but it was blank. Just the embroidered outline, no text. I told myself it had probably worn off. These guys spend a lot of time outdoors, uniforms get beaten up. I filed it and kept walking. Then I noticed the radio. Every ranger I've ever worked with, in 6 years of SAR coordination, carries a radio. It's not optional. It's how they call in positions, report conditions, stay in contact with dispatch. He had a radio holster on his belt. It was empty. I looked at it for a moment and then looked away. I thought maybe he left it in his vehicle. Maybe it's charging. Maybe this is his last hour of a shift, and he didn't think he needed it. There are 100 reasons a person might not have a radio on a casual walk back to the access road. I kept walking. Another 10 minutes. I checked my offline map and something didn't sit right. We were moving northeast, same as he'd said, but the ridge line we were following had curved. We were trending east now, maybe slightly south of east. I stopped and held out my phone to double check. He stopped too, watching me. "You're fine," he said. "The map doesn't account for the washout. There's a bypass trail that cuts around it." "I don't see a bypass trail marked," I said. "It's not marked. Service road, I know where it connects." I stood there for a moment, looking at my screen. The exit I'd come in from was to the west and slightly north. We were walking away from it, and the access road he'd mentioned, I zoomed out and looked. There was no northern access road on my map, just forest and then a long stretch of roadless wilderness, and then eventually a private timber lease that would take days to reach. I felt something settle in my chest, not panic, something quieter and colder than panic, the specific feeling of a situation rearranging itself. I put my phone in my pocket and said casually, "Hey, what's your badge number? I want to file a report about those trail markers when I get back." He looked at me, just for a half second too long before he answered. "I'd have to check. Don't have it memorized." Rangers have their badge numbers memorized. I know because I coordinated with dozens of them over 6 years. It's the first thing dispatch asks for. It's second nature. I said, "That's fine. I'll pull it from the district directory." He smiled. "Sure." We kept walking. I kept my pace exactly the same. I didn't let anything change in my face or my stride. He had no radio, no badge number, no knowledge of a basic identifying credential. He was walking me away from every exit I could identify on my map, and doing it calmly, confidently, with a plausible answer for everything. I started looking at the terrain differently. We were in a narrow drainage now, hemmed in by steep slopes on both sides. He was slightly ahead of me. I clocked his hands, still loose, nothing in them, in the shape of his jacket pockets. Something on the right side was heavy, something rectangular and solid. He stopped and turned to check on me. "You doing okay? You went quiet." "Knee's a little stiff," I said. "Old injury. We can take a break." "I'm fine. Actually, you know what? I want to call my contact before we lose signal. Let me just step back a bit." I turned and walked back the way we'd come. Normal pace, like I was looking for signal. He said, "You'll have better signal at the top of the ridge." "I'll try here first," I said without turning around. I gave it 30 seconds, like enough time to round the last bend, and then I went off trail, hard uphill to the left, through the brush, and I did not stop moving for 40 minutes. I climbed to the highest ground I could find, and I pulled up my compass, actual compass, not the phone, and I walked due west until the terrain matched my map again. 2 hours of hard movement. I hit the main trail as the light was starting to go, and I walked the last 4 miles to my car in the dark with my headlamp on, not stopping once. I filed a report with the ranger district the next morning. I described the man, the uniform, the route he'd been walking me on. The district coordinator told me they had no staff assigned to that section on that day, no patrol scheduled, no vehicles logged at any access point. She took my description seriously, asked for a written statement, and said they'd flag it for the sheriff's office. I gave the statement. I never heard anything back. There were a few missing persons reports filed from that forest over the previous 4 years. I found them later in public records. 2 male hikers, 1 woman, all solo, all in roughly the same drainage system, within a few miles of where I'd been. None of them were ever found. I don't know what he was planning. I don't know if he did something to those people or if there's some other explanation I haven't thought of. I'm not the type to assume the worst without evidence, but I think about the weight of that pocket. I think about the empty radio holster. I think about how patient he was and how long he must have been doing it to get that calm. The woods are quiet. That's the part that used to comfort me.